We join in saying the affirmation of covenant to show our aspirations of how we are going to make ourselves and the world a better place. Please join me in the affirmation of covenant. The words are printed in your program. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other.
Marvin Schwartz is a former journalist, speechwriter, university high school literature instructor, grants writer, and executive director for state nonprofit organizations. His diverse professional experiences in Arkansas include teaching creative writing in Arkansas public schools, increasing state resources for Holocaust education, supporting a CEO Leadership Council, and chronicling the lives of African American farmers and the cultural heritage of rural communities. He has a Master's of Fine Arts in Poetry from the University of Arkansas, and his writing has won awards from the Poets Roundtable of Arkansas, the University of Arkansas, and the American Academy of Poets. In addition to all that, he is also a national champion masters swimmer and an avid mandolin player. And he is a UU and part of our church, so we're very glad. Please give Marvin a warm welcome.
Good morning. Today I'm going to talk about sacred space, the Buffalo River, and a few other topics. I'd like to begin with lyrics from a Joni Mitchell song that many of you probably remember. It's called Woodstock. Woodstock, the music festival, took place in the Catskill Mountains of New York, and the festival was owned on land by a man named Max Yasgur. He's mentioned in the song, Max Yasgur's farm. The lyrics go like this. Well, I came upon a child of God. He was walking along the road, and I asked him, tell me, where are you going? And this he told me. Said, I'm going down to Yasgur's farm, going to join in a rock and roll band, going to get back to the land, going to set my soul free. So if our souls need to be set free, we can ask, what is it that is keeping them in bondage? Joni Mitchell goes on. We are stardust, we are golden, we are billion-year-old carbon, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. What is the garden? The garden is the opposite of the attitude we have today toward our use of natural resources. The attitude that got us into the situation that we are in today. The mindset that originated in the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century, a value system that encouraged the expansion of capitalism. These are the policies that brought us to where we are today, and they were based on expansion. Those values appreciate a natural space only as material, as something to be used. So our great forests became the low-hanging fruit for timber cutters. And the minerals in our soil, the coal and the natural gas, were all to be dug up and harvested. These policies did not honor the natural resources or natural resource conservation. They did not honor the land or the people who were occupying the land. They were simply to use the land up and move on. So that's what happened in Oklahoma and Texas in the 1930s. Industrial agriculture, monocrops of cotton, caused the Great Dust Bowl and left the land in neglect and decay. And the attitude in the United States at that time, and still to some degree today, was we just keep moving west. There's always a west for the United States, someplace new to go. And we moved west until there was no more west. And our coastlines on the west coast are now as crowded as anywhere. And in the largest sense, if we talk about climate change, we used to call it global warming, that phrase is being no longer used. Altogether, we can say we're simply using it up faster than we can get it back. In another Joni Mitchell song, she says very simply, they take paradise and put up a parking lot. Unitarian Universalist congregations have principles and sources, which are our values and our moral guides. One of the principles, number 7, is key to our concepts this morning. It says, we shall have respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. An interdependent web. And we have 6 sources that underlie the 7 principles and help us achieve the principles. And the source, number 6, happens to be spiritual teachings of an earth-centered traditions, which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Interdependent web of all existence, earth-centered traditions, living in harmony with the rhythms of nature. These are the guiding principles of our congregation. And they tell us that who we are is determined by how we live and the choices we make in our life. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about gardens and why gardens are so good for us. Why are gardens good for the soul? And gardens are spiritual places. They're places to find comfort and healing. When we're wounded in body or spirit, we're often drawn to the natural world as a place to heal. A garden is our place of healing. Kneeling on the ground with your hands in the soil is a deeply life-giving gesture. Your mind clears and your spirit is refreshed. So gardens are good for you because you can be yourself. A garden is an honest place. Plants are honest with us. They tell us when they're not getting enough water or sun. And when we are surrounded by honesty, we drop our defenses and let ourselves be honest. We become who we are. A sanctuary is a place to be yourself. And gardens are good for you because you can slow down. You step away from the daily activity, the news, the noise, the violence, the fears of today's world. And gardens are good for you because you can receive love and healing. A garden is built on love, and love emerges from the care that goes into a garden. This is a powerful healing force, a fundamental life force that is in every living thing. And gardens are good for you because you can open to change. As we accept the cycles of life and death in a garden, we can move toward acceptance of those cycles in ourselves and in those we love. Gardens affirm that life goes on and will continue after and without us. And gardens are good for us because you can find life in death. Gardens show us that death not only is part of life, but enables life. Our Western culture promotes a linear process. We're always moving, trying to move in a straight line toward some fixed goal, rather than a cyclical pattern, a seasonal progression. And the garden, which we'll call nature in all capital letters, is a work of art that is constantly living and dying in front of us. And there's something beautiful and comforting in that. But since we're intellectual creatures and we're scientists, many of us like to know what is it that happens to us in gardens. We know they're good for us, but what happens to your brain when you're in the garden, when you're in nature? And studies of human physiology and identify certain psychological traits that happen when you're in nature. Being in nature decreases your stress. Being in nature makes you happier and less brooding. Nature relieves attention fatigue and increases creativity. Nature makes you feel more alive. And nature is a free resource that keeps us psychologically healthy. It's free. Many of us can access it just by walking outside our door. And so we tell our children, if you are constantly on that device or in front of a screen, you're missing out on something that's pretty spectacular. It's the real world. Let's take a shift, and I'll talk for a moment about the Buffalo River, as I'm involved in the Ozark Society, which has a long heritage of protecting the Buffalo River and engaging people in its appreciation. Every one of us has a Buffalo River story. The time you saw an eagle, the time you floated in silence and beauty, the time you tumped. You know what tump is, right? And so the buffalo, for all its grandeur and size, becomes a personal place. And a personal place is a sacred space. Let me say that again. A personal place is a sacred space for those who live there, for those who floated and camped, for those who hiked and climbed there. People such as the great American painter Thomas Hart Benton, who made many trips to the Buffalo River and captured the spirituality of that place in his brushstrokes, just as others have captured it in their words or in their silent meditation. In the 1950s, in the late 1950s, Dr. Neil Compton of Bentonville, who loved the Buffalo River, discovered that others loved the river for a different reason than he did. Compton was a Bentonville physician, an outdoorsman, raising his children with frequent trips to the river. His neighbors were the Waltons, and their children grew up together. Compton saw that others appreciated the river for the timber to be cut and for the potential as lakefront property. The idea for a lake and the dams that would create it were the core issues of the 1970 citizen effort called Save the Buffalo. It was championed by the Ozark Society. Many Universalist Unitarian members were part of that original effort. Mary Thompson was certainly a champion in that. And many others are still involved today with the Pulaski County chapter of the Ozark Society. Some are sitting in the room with us this morning. So I want you to imagine the river carving its canyon through the rocks as it has done for millions of years, one of the last free-flowing streams in the region. Imagine the gravel bars and the rope swings, the massive bluff walls, the birds roosting in the crevices. Imagine all this underneath 200 feet of water. A lake that would flood the valley a mile wide in some places. John Prine has a wonderful song about a coal mining town in Kentucky called Paradise. And in that song, he uses these words. Then the coal company came with the world's largest shovel. They tortured the timber and stripped all the land. They dug for their coal till the land was forsaken. Then they wrote it all down as the progress of man. The dams that were planned for the buffalo were not to be spectacular. They were modest compared to some that the Corps of Engineers had built on Bull Shoals, Beaver Lake, DeGray, Lake Norfolk. Virtually every river in Arkansas had or was planned to have a significant dam. These are all former river systems that cut through the Ozark and Ouachita Mountains. But the Buffalo River, because it was a very small, free-flowing stream and temperamental, it would dry up in places, it would stop flowing and go underground. It needed 2 dams to create this impoundment. And deep inside those concrete foundations of those walls, the turbines would produce low-cost power, while up above on the potential shoreline, there would be new homes, marinas, a recreational development. There would be new wealth. So the ability to alter nature, that was the mindset of the time. And it's still the mindset of this time as well. Even though we know far better today the consequences of adding improvements to the land. Unfortunately, in 1970, 1972, that did not happen. And history has proven correct those people who first stood up against the dam and then convinced Congress to establish the first national river in the United States, in our national park system. Dr. Compton and others showed the courage and foresight. They had community to defy the mainstream progress and power systems. This year, 2022, is the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the Buffalo River. And much has happened between 1972 and now. There have been numerous efforts to dam other Arkansas rivers, to dredge the rivers for gravel, for timber cutting, for road development, for tourism development, for agricultural development. Now, to understand a river, you must identify its watershed, which is its life support region that surrounds the river. A watershed includes the land that surrounds the river. It's a large area we often ignore. And if you think about it, watershed is an interesting concept. It's much like our own lives. For if we see ourselves as a river, our lives flowing in full times, sometimes dried up and slow, sometimes frozen over, the community that we inhabit is our watershed. And we are influenced by everything that happens in that watershed. Sometimes in a large way, such as with COVID-19. Sometimes in a small way, when someone smiles and says good morning to you. This is our personal watershed. This is our personal place, which makes it our sacred space. So a watershed is to a river as a community is to the individual. The Buffalo River watershed comprises 9 counties across north central Arkansas, a lot of land. The Buffalo River itself and the park that protects the river is 11% of the total watershed. So the protected area of the river is only 11% of the entire space that influences the river. The majority of the land is undeveloped rural acres in private ownership, not subject to the government or park standards of operation, which means that if you have some property there and you see a commercial potential for your site, you can get a permit to establish a new business. And that's all part of Arkansas life. It's all appropriate, except when it's not. Because in the year about 2000, some very clever folks obtained a permit to establish what was called the C&H Hog Farm on Big Creek in Newton County in the Buffalo River watershed. Now, I call them clever folks because they obtained the permit through backroom political deals and secrecy from public review. The permit for the C&H Hog Farm established what is called a CAFO, C-A-F-O, which stands for a Caged Animal Feeding Operation. The permit allowed for the creation of a grow-out farm for up to 400 hogs inside a large metal barn. The young animals were trucked in, raised to a certain weight, and then trucked away. kept inside this building on concrete pens. They never touched dirt. They never saw the sun. But that's how it's done in corporate agriculture. It's not a pretty sight because the pens have to be washed out, and the waste is very potassium heavy. That waste, liquid waste, goes into holding ponds on the site until the sludge can be pumped into trucks and then used as spray fertilizer on pasture land in the region. This encourages the growth of grass and hay, which leads to cattle. So there's a great economic boon here. But there's a price to be paid as well. The C&H hog farm was in an area of limestone. That's what most of the Buffalo Mountains are made of. It is a porous rock that is known as karst, with the high probability that the liquid waste from the ponds would leach into the soil and emerge in the Buffalo River downstream. And so the Ozark Society got involved because state government would not. And the Buffalo River Watershed Alliance, a coalition of multiple organizations, was formed to coordinate the public position. Save the Buffalo Again became the rallying cry in 2020. And the battle was won. And the farm was paid to leave the site. We paid for that, $7 million. The battle was won, but the challenge goes on. And what is the future of the Buffalo National River? It's facing a remarkable increase in human traffic. Now more than 1.5 million people every year come to this beautiful natural place. 1.5 million people. So how does the policy of leave no trace, environmental policy of leave no trace, how does that apply when you can park a monster truck on a gravel bar, completely legal, where you can camp anywhere on the river that you would choose? Wood cutting, camping is allowed, and when human residue is left behind. So we must ask, what will this river be like in 50 years, in 200 years? Will people still float and camp? We certainly hope so. So the Buffalo River gives us a sacred space. It's Arkansas's great conservation story. Jimmy Driftwood, Arkansas musician, said, "The Buffalo River was Arkansas's gift to the nation and the nation's gift to the world." And one visitor in the 1970s was Supreme Court Justice William Douglas, who said, I think he was the first one to phrase it, the Buffalo River is a national treasure. And so there's a film created this year by the Ozark Society. It's titled First River, How Arkansas Saved the National Treasure. It tells the history in much more detail than I've skimmed over of the dam opposition in 1970 and the effort to create the park and the current situation of the hog farm and the current situation of human overutilization of the park. The Ozark Society produced the film, First River, and we put it out to the public as a public service. It's available for free screening, downloading, viewing 24/7 on the Ozark Society website. As soon as you open up the OS website, there's a link to First River. It's 53 minutes. It's a full-length documentary, 53 minutes and 25 seconds, because that's the length of time you need to be shown on PBS public television. And the film has been shown on PBS in Arkansas and other states. It'll be seen in some film festivals coming up this fall. First River, the film, shows what we can do locally. And so we must ask, what's happening locally? What can we do in our backyards? What are our opportunities and challenges? Exodus chapter 3, book of Exodus. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that Moses had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, said, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here I am." "Do not come any closer," God said. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." The burning bush, that's sustainable agriculture if I've ever seen it. The burning bush is on holy ground. Take off your shoes and put on your gardening boots. So what is sacred space? And how do we know we are a part of it? How does it make us feel? What is your sacred space? If I asked you individually, I would guess no one would tell me, "Oh, it's my desk in my office cubicle." No one's going to say, "Oh, it's when I'm riding the elevator." We know where it is. It's in our hearts and it's right out there. A few years ago, Sandy and I were traveling in British Columbia on Vancouver Island. We came across a park area that was called Cathedral Grove. In this Cathedral Grove area, there are Douglas fir trees that are about 900 years old. Trees that are so tall and straight, they stand like pillars in the earth. You can't see the overstory, the upper leaf strata, unless you arch way back and look straight up. You can't even see. All you see are the pillars of these magnificent trees. So you stand at the base of these giants and you feel like an ant. And it's a good feeling because the size is right and the connection is clear. But in many places, the awareness of sacred space is less obvious because it is an awareness of ourselves and how we behave and what choices we make and how we live with the choices that have been made by others. For example, monarch butterflies, our beautiful orange visitors, are now on what's called the red list of threatened species. And the North American migration of monarch butterflies, which is considered one of the world's natural wonders, these tiny insects fly thousands of miles north. It takes them a couple of generations to get north, and they come back in one generation. Single butterflies flying perhaps 2,500 miles. The monarch butterflies are on the red list of threatened species. How did this happen? Who killed the monarch butterflies?
I didn't do it.
Chris Thompson, did you do it?
I didn't do
You
it.
didn't. Bill Goolsby, did you kill the monarchs? Nobody killed them. What happened? One, climate change means that plants blossom at earlier times, changing the seasonal habits of millions of butterflies that spend the winter on only a small area, a few hectares in Mexico. That's changing. That Mexican habitat is being diminished due to illegal logging. And as the butterflies migrate north across North America, they deposit their eggs in milkweed plants, only in milkweed and a few other special plants. That's where they must lay their eggs. But milkweed is a weed, and it's disliked by farmers who use a pesticide called Roundup, and milkweed is gone. Herbicides, habitat loss, extreme weather are the cause of the red listing of the monarchs. You can ask, what did I do to cause that problem? My community wouldn't kill, we're not going to kill butterflies, but it's happening. What can we do about it? So coincidentally, the day that Linda von Blaricom asked me to make this talk, this was back in July, the same day in the newspaper, July 16, in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, there was an article about creating a pollinator garden on your site. And they interviewed a woman named Heather Isbell, she and her husband operate Izzy's Restaurant on West Little Rock. She has dedicated her home space to be an extensive pollinator garden, filled it with milkweed and other butterfly attracting plants. And she's selling honey at the site and she's giving away seedlings. She's turned her personal space into a sacred space. What else can we do? There's a concept called community-supported agriculture, where people invest in a small farm to produce the fruits and vegetables and herbs that we enjoy. Would that be possible on this site? You kids, triplets, would you like to grow some tomatoes and cucumbers and strawberries right out in this backyard? Sell them to everybody around here in the summertime? I bet they would. Would you folks buy your summer squash and tomatoes right if it was growing right here on this side? Of course you would. There wouldn't be a veggie left over any Sunday afternoon. Community-supported agriculture. It's happening all around us. There are many models of CSA, community agriculture, and the incentives to create them. There's a great model in the Hillary Clinton Children's Library right here in Little Rock. It's one of Sandy and my favorite places. There's a garden there, there's a greenhouse, and you're encouraged to walk in the garden, pick a leaf of lettuce, pick some basil, wrap it around a pepper, fix yourself a little snack as you walk through. Patrice O'Donoghue, one of our longtime members, is a librarian there with responsibility. Several times we've been there, and she's come out of the building and said, let me cut you some lettuce or cut you some of the things over there. It's a wonderful place. Another thing that can happen is an organization, a nonprofit, a church can apply for a youth environmental grant that's given by the Ozark Society in a program we are sponsored now for about 3 years. We're giving money to organizations that engage young people in environmental education, hands-on learning. It's happening around the state as well as in Missouri and Louisiana. And these children are building trails with ADA access. They're cleaning up rivers. They're removing invasive plants. Remarkably, and new to me, all of these learning programs for children encourage a new learning strand. Now, if you work for the Department of Education, you have to have accountability. So we could think of the Buffalo River as a base for teaching science. We could see teaching history. It's also being used as a base for teaching social and emotional learning, which is the mental health of young people. Social and emotional learning are a critical element in our children's development these days. So the film, First River, when you go to the Ozark site, you'll see that it has at the bottom a link to a teacher's guide, which an educator contributed for us, with lesson plans to help students learn science and history and also use the powers of nature to become healthier and more balanced human beings. And so the power of nature is the power of awe. And awe can make kids and adults less self-absorbed. Awe creates a greater sense of time and happiness. Awe makes us more generous, and is a feeling of awe that will make us healthier people. So I encourage you, all of us, to cultivate our natural spaces, which is your sacred space, which is the garden that Joni Mitchell wants us to get back to. And so I'll conclude with some advice for planting that garden that we hope we'll see next spring, which will be the garden of our daily living with a few essential crops. So in your garden, you must plant 3 rows of peas. Peas of mind, peas of heart, and peas of soul. And you must plant 4 rows of squash, because you will squash gossip, you will squash indifference, you will squash grumbling, and you will squash selfishness. And you must plant 4 rows of lettuce, because let us be faithful, let us be kind, let us be patient, let us really love one another. And no garden is complete without turnips. Turnips for meeting, turnip for service, turnip to help one another. And finally, our garden must always have time for each other, time for families, time for friends. Water your garden freely, with patience, and cultivate with love. There is much to be harvested, and we will reap what we sow. Thank you.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And since I missed our closing words, I think they're so important. Let's repeat them. They're in your order of service. Go out into the world in peace, have courage, hold on to what is good, return to no person evil for evil, strengthen the faint-hearted, support the weak, help the suffering, honor all beings. Now we have a special closing by Marvin in honor of Rosh Hashanah.
So we are in what's called the High Holy Days of the Jewish faith. It starts last week with Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and ends in a few days with Yom Kippur, a Day of Atonement. And during the opening and closing services, there is the blowing of the shofar. The shofar is a ram's horn. We brought this back from Jerusalem. They're usually bone-colored, ashy white. This was from a black ram, a little more special. And the Bible, there's multiple references to shofars in the Bible. It's been around a while. And it's used to lead the people. It's a call to action. And it's a reminder to go out into the world with that courage.